What kind of strategic changes might we see under interim head coach Mike Kafka? Locked on Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to a special bonus edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, welcome on into our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and especially on today's bonus episode. And on today's bonus episode, I've been getting questions all week. What kind of changes might we see with Mike Kafka specific to the game plan? So I did a little research and I took a look at what potentially might change offensively, which we'll talk about in segment one. I looked at what might potentially change defensively, which we will talk about in segment two. And then in segment three, I'm going to answer another question I've been getting a lot of this past week, and that is, will there be any further coaching changes? Will guys be kept on regardless of what happens? So that's what we're going to cover on today's bonus episode of Locked On Giants. Again, welcome on in to everybody. All right, let's jump in here. So with the offensive side of the ball, we know all along Mike Kafka's been calling the plays, but Brian Dable, when he was here as the head coach, he had a very heavy hand in designing the offensive game plan. And it was just a matter of Kafka giving kind of like feedback as to what he thought might fit into the overall picture. Well, now Kafka's kind of in charge of that, being the interim head coach with assistance from Tim Kelly, who was named the offensive coordinator. So there are a couple of things that I think might be coming back. We saw a little bit of it in the preseason. There are a couple of things that I think we might see more of moving forward with Tim Kelly, who has been an offensive coordinator before, and Mike Kafka collaborating. So here's what I came up with. The number one thing that I think we might see more of is the screen game, specifically the running back screen game. All right, so I went and I looked at what the Giants did in the preseason versus what they have done so far in the screen game for the running backs. Running back screens in the preseason, they ran it 9 times and they averaged 46.3 yards per game on running back screens, according to True Media. That comes out to an average of 15.4 yards per play, right? Not too bad. And thus far in the regular season, they've only run a screen, running back screen 7 times, 3.3 yards per game, 3.3 yards obviously per play. So they've kind of gone backwards. But here's the thing, folks. In the preseason, who was running most of those screens, those running back screens? Dante Turbo Miller. So, the Giants have been going with 2 running backs now for several weeks, since Cam Scadaboo's injury. They're playing with fire by going with 2 running backs. So I think that if they really want to get that screen game back into the offense, and it worked for them in the preseason, the numbers, despite the fact that they only had 2 more plays in the preseason than they did in the regular season, they had better production. So why wouldn't you start elevating Dante Miller, who was really a big part of the success they had in the preseason, on the screen game? It just makes too much sense. And, it's interesting because the Giants, the injury situation that they have now, they're going to need to bring up, obviously, a kicker, young White, who is going to be brought up again. They're going to probably have to bring up a defensive lineman because Chauncey Golston and Nacho, Joaquin Nunez-Roches, is not going to play. But I'm wondering if perhaps it makes sense for them to put Evan Neal, who has a hamstring, on IR, because look, Evan Neal's just not going to play for this team, so why take up a roster spot? Put him on IR and sign Dante Miller to the 53-man roster. I think it just makes too much sense. Ideally, you want to exhaust your 3 practice squad elevations. Well, Dante Miller doesn't make that much if you elevate him or promote him, I should say, from the practice squad to the regular 53-man roster. So I just think that that move makes too much sense. And if I had to take a guess, I think that would be the way to go. Sign Miller to the 53 after you put Evan Neal on IR, elevate Koo and one of the defensive linemen, whether that be Jordan Riley or I think Elijah Garcia's on there, Elijah Chapman's on there. So elevate one of those guys, and you're set now moving forward. But we'll see if that's indeed what the Giants do, especially, if they go back and they look at how the screen game worked for them so well in the preseason with Dante Miller running it. All right. Now, the other thing I took a look at was I wanted to see how the Giants or what they did as far as their success rate and their usage rate of different offensive strategies. So, for example, like motion, no huddle, play action, and RPO. So I broke it down in terms of weeks 1 through week 8, and then what they have done the last couple of weeks. All right. Now, interestingly enough, weeks 1 through 8, let me give you what they did for motion. They ran it 41% of the time, broken down into 62% passing and 38% running. The last 2 weeks, only 30% of the time, but they've upped the passing to 66 and the running has dropped down by 4%. So that's at 34%. They've had better success the last couple of weeks with motion. No huddle. There's been an increase the last 2 weeks of no huddle. All right. So weeks 1 through 8, they ran no huddle 20% of the time, which breaks down to 54.9% in the run game and 46% in the passing game. Last 2 weeks, 29% overall, 67% of the time in the run game and 33% in the passing game. So they've got no huddle and run a little bit more in the running game the last couple of weeks. All right, play action. Play action, they ran it the first 8 weeks, 14% of the time, which broke down to 99% passing and 1% running. The last 2 weeks, they dropped that. Actually, it's gone up a little bit, 15%, running at 95% of the time and 5% of the time. And then for RPOs, which, they've been going crazy with, the first 8 weeks, they ran RPOs 18% of the time, which breaks down to 15% run, 85% pass. And the last couple of weeks, RPOs have dropped a little bit, 14% overall, 89% run, and 11% pass. And those stats, by the way, via SIS. All right. So what can we take away from that? We probably will continue to see motion, which seems to be working well for the Giants. No huddle. I don't know that we'll see a whole lot of no huddle with Jameis Winston set to be the quarterback this week. I think they'll probably not do that a whole lot. Play action is going to be key, especially if they can get the run game going. And I don't know that we'll see a whole lot of RPOs. That would just be my guess as to what we're going to see this week from the offense. Now, will that continue each week? No. I mean, it's going to depend on, obviously, the opponent that they're facing. But that's kind of how it breaks down. And those are the, primary changes that I think we'll see as far as, what the Giants will do now with Mike Kafka basically having full control over the offensive game plan. All right. So coming up next, we're going to take a look at potential changes to the defensive strategy. So don't go anywhere. We'll have that for you right after this. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action if you haven't tried it yet. Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you will win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. The new Stacks feature is a game changer. You can now pick more or less on, for example, Jameis Winston's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. So go on, download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants special bonus edition. We're doing a Saturday edition of Locked On Giants because basically you guys have been asking me all kinds of questions about what can we expect that's going to be different, what to look for. And, so I figured why not do a bonus episode? I promised you guys I would do a bonus episode. If you missed yesterday's episode with Ed Valentine, I said I would do it, and here it is. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you're enjoying your Saturday. All right, in this segment, what might be different for the Giants on defense? All right, so I took a look again at the defensive alignment, and this segment actually came about when somebody said to me, I watched the Giants defense, and I don't know what exactly they're running. Are they running a 3-4? Are they running a 4-3? Sometimes I see two-man fronts. What exactly are they running, and what might they do to kind of stabilize it? Now, Shane Bowen, when he spoke to the media on Thursday, he did say that, there would be some tweaks made, as did Mike Kafka, obviously. Mike's going to, well, he already has, obviously, but he's communicated to Shane Bowen what he likes and what he doesn't like. So I went back with the help of SIS, and I took a look at how the Giants, or what they have run in terms of their top defensive alignments. So their top 5 defensive alignment in order: 3-3-5, 28%, 4-3-4, 19%. That's, of course, their base defense. 4-2-5, the nickel, 11%. 2-4-5, 10%. All right, so let's break that down now in terms of the run and the passing game. All right, this is based on the amount of times they ran it. So a 3-3-5, it broke down to 36% run, 64% pass. The 4-3-4, the base, 59% run, 41% pass. 4-2-5, 33% run, 67% pass, and 2-4-5, 32% run, 68% pass. The 4-3-4 alignment ranks 12th overall, 10th versus the run. Folks, I suspect we're going to see a little bit more of the 4-3-4. It just makes too much sense. If you're going to have 3 down linemen going against 5 offensive linemen, well, 2 guys can double team Dexter Lawrence. And now if the other 2 guys are not getting free, what good is it? And, this week, especially the Giants are not going to have Kayvon Thibodeau. He's been declared out. So Kayvon Thibodeau, you look at his run game, his run defense, he's actually been pretty good in that regard. So, the Giants are going to need to put more beef up front in the run defense, I think, in order to plug holes and just force guys outside and whatnot. All right, now on the 2-4-5, because this was a big one, believe it or not, the Giants used the 2-4-5. They're ranked 10th overall, 9th versus the pass, and 11th versus the run. Those 2 formations were actually their best ones in terms of against the run, in that they were in the top, 15. So in looking at these numbers, and again, this is from SIS, if I had to take a guess, I would say we're probably going to see maybe fewer than 2-4-5s. I mean, again, because of the injury situation, I think you've got to go more with the 3-3-5 at the very least. And, that might be one way to go. And, I also looked at zone and man, and believe it or not, the Giants have been kind of mixing that a little bit better. It hasn't been exclusively zone or predominantly zone coverage. It's been a mixture. The Giants are looking like they're going to get Paulson Adebo back, which would be big. Because if you can line up Paulson Adebo and Cordell Flott as your cornerbacks, and by the way, Tyler Nubin is not going to play. I think he's listed as doubtful, but I don't anticipate he's going to play this weekend. So if you have Javon Holland and Dane Belton as your safeties, you know what? I like the thought of that defensive alignment, that defensive backfield alignment, right? So Adebo and Flott as your corners, and uh, Belton and Holland as your safeties. So now you have a little bit of an upgrade there, because now you don't have to worry about Tyler Nubin and the poor angles he's been taking. You don't have to worry about Deontay Banks and being grabby and whatnot. I think they could maybe run a little bit more in terms of the man coverage, right? Which, if they can do that and hold their coverage, maybe now that helps the pass rush, because that's going to be a big key. So this is just, like I said, this is just a wild guess on my part based on the data, based on the personnel that is likely to be available. Like I said, I do believe they're going to add a defensive lineman because they're a little short in that area. But, they've got to get a better push up front. And, it also starts with getting off blocks and filling run fits, which they have not done a very good job of, which is why they have struggled against the running game. And, the Packers offense, they can burn you with the pass, and they can, of course, burn you with the run. They're multifaceted. So I think this is going to be an opportunity for them to tweak, the Giants, that is, to tweak a few things to maybe slow that Packers offense down. Now, the other question a lot of you have asked me, how much more does Shane Bowen have as far as the leash goes? Folks, if there is another fourth quarter collapse, if the defense can't stop a leak, okay, I don't think Bowen survives. I just don't think he's going to make it to the end of the season unless these tweaks that Kafka wants fixes things. And what gives me hope that maybe the defense will be a little bit better, Kafka, of course, was a former NFL quarterback. So he studied stuff. He knows stuff. He knows what works, what doesn't work, what wouldn't he want to face, and so on and so forth. I think that experience is going to be invaluable in helping the defense maybe straighten things out a little bit in terms of, suggestions that Kafka can give to Shane Bowen. There's always an advantage when you have a former player turned coach who can give that player's perspective. And that's why I kind of have hope that the Giants defense is going to be a little bit better, despite the injuries that it's dealing with. You're also going to see Abdul Carter, by the way, who, with Kayvon Thibodeau out, now Abdul Carter is going to play on the outside. It's going to be Carter and Burns. So that's going to help them as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that all plays out. But I'm optimistic. I think the defense hopefully will play a little bit better with the tweaks. And, of course, we will see if that is the case. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, another question y'all asked me is, so what other coaching changes might be made, whether it be in the short term or in the long term? Well, I'll give you a list of what I think is going to happen right after this. Hey, Giant fans, there's nothing better than being in the stadium for an NFL game surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping up at checkout, it is frustrating. That's why you need to check out Game Time, the app that gives you the advantage. Back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included so that the price you see is the price you pay. Check out their zone deals. Pick the section and Game Time will pick the seats, and you will save big. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets to your favorite events with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants bonus edition. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're throwing in an extra episode because, look, there were a lot of things that went down this week. And, as you know, we do the crossover show on Thursday, but I really wanted to get an extra show in because there were some unfinished business that I wanted to talk about on the podcast this week. And that's what the show is all about. So hope you're enjoying it. All right. Another big question I've gotten from fans is what kind of coaching changes could we expect now that Dable is out? Mike Kafka's the interim head coach. And, where's the coaching headed? All right. First thing I want to say is that people are asking me also, who's on your list of head coaching candidates for the Giants? I haven't put a list together yet. I have a rough list, but nothing firm just yet. But here's the thing, guys. Kafka's actually getting a shot here. This is a legitimate shot to make that job his, right? This is not just him filling in like, Steve Spagnuolo did a few years ago when Ben McAdoo got fired in season. This is a 7-game audition for Mike Kafka to convince Joe Schoen and ownership that he can handle the job moving forward. So this is going to be a really good experience for Mike Kafka. Now, what does he need to do to keep the job? The Giants have 7 games left. I think 4-3 will get it done. I know that is asking a lot given what they have on the schedule. But if he can win 4 games, I think there's a good chance maybe they keep him. And, the argument that they can maybe make to ownership to keep him if he goes 4-3, hey, Jackson Dart's worked with him. He's worked with this system. Mike's a former quarterback. Let's keep, the status quo there. Does it make sense? I suppose it does. I'm not in favor of keeping a coach just because of Jackson Dart and, his development is going to get stunted. But at the end of the day, do we really know who was really most influential in Jackson Dart, rounding out those finer or those rough spots in his game? We don't. We don't know if it was Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach, or Kafka or Dable or some combination of it. But, if you want to make the argument that, hey, let's not upset the apple cart with Jackson Dart, there's an argument for you, especially if Kafka goes 4-3 to close out the season. All right, so what about the rest of the coaching staff? Quite frankly, I think there's maybe a small handful of coaches I think would survive if Kafka stays on. And even if he doesn't, these would be coaches that I would recommend if I were ownership to the next, head coach coming in that maybe they consider keeping. And they include the offensive line duo of Carmen Brasillo and James Ferentz, because believe it or not, folks, the offensive line has been a middle of the pack unit as opposed to a bottom of the pack unit. So there has been improvement on the offensive line. I would definitely look to keep Brasillo and Ferentz. I would keep the defensive line duo of Andre Patterson and Brian Cox, right? Now, even though, we look at Dexter Lawrence and we say, oh, he's not playing like Dexter Lawrence, the defensive line isn't getting the push, there are other reasons for that, and it's not the coaching. Cox and Patterson, 2 of the best in the business. I would not want to see them leave. And, we talk about the importance of the trenches. So, your offensive line duo is doing well. Your defensive line duo has a good, strong history. I wouldn't change that if I'm Kafka or the next head coach, whoever that might be. Would I change out Michael Gabriel, the special teams coordinator? I think I would lean towards keeping him as well. Now, I know special teams hasn't been great of late. Part of that is because of the kicking situation, which I point back to the personnel decisions that are made by, the GM and the head coach, the former head coach. You could also point to injuries and how, Gabriel has had to lose guys in certain weeks. Like, for example, when Dane Belton was needed to play on defense, his special team snaps were reduced a little bit. Abdul Carter's special team snaps were reduced a little bit. And if you don't have anybody really, up to snuff to replace those guys, which is usually the case on specials, they're going to suffer. So I would consider keeping Michael Gabriel. As for the rest of the group, obviously, I think I would consider keeping Tim Kelly. If it is Kafka. I think he would keep Tim Kelly. He does have experience as an offensive coordinator. If it's not, Kafka, then depending on the next head coach, if it's an offensive-minded coach, obviously he's going to want his own guy. Even if it's a defensive-minded coach, he's going to want his own guy. Now, the biggest question: defensive coordinator. You know how I feel about Shane Bowen. Nice man, very pleasant, very helpful as much as he can be, but he's got to go. Just not a good defensive coordinator, in my opinion. I wouldn't mind seeing Antonio Pierce get that job. I think AP would do a really, really good job with that defense, with all that talent that's there, that's been underutilized. I think AP would maybe be able to get through to a Deontay Banks, having been a former player himself. I think AP would just be really, really good in that role. I would jump for joy if they hired him as the defensive coordinator. As far as the rest, here's the bottom line. Dable had made it a change in the defensive backfield coaching, and it hasn't helped. You saw Tyler Nubin regress. Drew Phillips has struggled. Deontay Banks can't get out of the gate. I don't know that the change was made for the better. So I don't know if I would necessarily keep both, of those coaches, Burris and Marquand Manuel. The linebackers coaches, I am leaning towards no on them, but, I guess you can make a case, but I'm leaning towards no on both the outside and the inside linebacker coaches. The running backs coach, Liddell Betts, I don't know. The injuries there, again, a problem, but I don't think he survives. I don't think the receivers coach, Mike Rowe, is retained. Just a toss-up, to be honest with you. I think, again, the guys that I would definitely like to see stay would be Ferentz and Brasillo, Patterson and Cox, and Gabriel. Everybody else, I think if they moved on, I don't think would be that big of a deal. Now, that all said, you would want the next head coach, whoever that might be, to pick his guys and not have recommendations from ownership, because we all know that doesn't work out well. We saw that a few years ago with the recommendation that Jason Garrett be hired as an OC. So, going to be curious to see. Now, I do think, the staff as is going to make it through the rest of the season, although I'm not so sure about Bowen, what they're going to do there. But Kafka, the one thing I will say about him that I like so far, and I've always liked about Kafka, he's intense, but he's not out of control. He's not one who I think is going to pop a cork on the sideline if something goes wrong, the way that Dable did. And there's something to be said about having a degree of control or calmness on the sideline, especially in heated situations. Because if you pop a cork and you go all crazy, can you really think straight and make sound decisions? I don't think so. So one of the things I'm really looking forward to with seeing from Kafka is if he can stay in control, which I believe he can, and how his decision-making process is. So in addition to, I think needing to win 4 out of the last 7 games, which I know is a big ask given the schedule, but, that's why you line up and you play the game. I just want to see how Kafka grows over these next 7 weeks. But again, don't rule him out just yet, because if he does well, there is a chance he will get an interview and get strong consideration to have that interim title removed from his overall position title. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this bonus edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. For your next listen, get a double dose of Locked On NFL with Tyler the Madman Rowland, who gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I'll see you on Sunday night. We'll have takeaways, recaps, the whole works from Mike Kafka's first game as interim head coach against the Green Bay Packers. So Hope you'll tune in, and we will see you then.